I didn't catch my wife cheating. I caught her moving money, quietly, carefully, through a locked garage at midnight like our marriage was just paperwork she could file away. And the worst part? Everyone around us acted like I was the problem for asking questions. If you've ever been used, dismissed, or manipulated by the people closest to you, this story is going to hit hard. Subscribe now, because what happened after that hidden door opened changed everything. Most mornings started the same way. Coffee brewed while I scanned emails from work, my badge already clipped to my belt before the sun fully cleared the rooftops. I managed facilities for a federal contractor outside DC, the kind of job that ran on checklists and accountability. People trusted me because things didn't fall apart on my watch. I took pride in that. Order felt earned. At home in our Maryland suburb, I carried that same rhythm. Bills paid early, repairs handled before they turned into problems. I listened more than I spoke. My wife used to say I was steady. Her parents said dependable, usually right before asking for something. The first cracks weren't loud. They came wrapped in casual remarks. "You're so rigid sometimes," my wife said one evening, glancing at her phone while I explained why we shouldn't co-sign another loan for her brother. I let it go. Stress makes people careless with words. That's what I told myself. Her mother started treating decisions as announcements instead of conversations. A contractor hired to help out suddenly billed to our joint account. When I asked, she waved it off. "It's family. Don't make it weird." The garage changed before I noticed myself noticing. What used to be a place for tools and storage turned into a locked zone. Boxes I didn't recognize. A small filing cabinet shoved behind an old freezer. The door stayed closed more often than not. One Saturday morning, I stepped in to grab jumper cables and found my father-in-law standing there, startled, like I'd walked into a room I didn't belong in. "Just organizing some stuff," he said too quickly. I nodded, stepped back, closed the door. Silence felt easier than confrontation. It always had. At work, people asked my opinion before acting. At home, decisions moved forward without me. The contrast bothered me more than I admitted. Still, I kept things smooth. I told myself leadership didn't always mean being heard. The night it crossed a line didn't come with drama. No shouting, no slammed doors. I woke up close to midnight to the sound of the back door clicking shut. The bed felt lighter. From the hallway, I saw the garage light flick on under the door. I waited, counted breaths, listened. Minutes passed, then more. Curiosity nudged at me, quiet but persistent. I walked down the stairs, my steps careful out of habit, and opened the door to the garage. The air smelled like dust and motor oil. The filing cabinet drawer stood open. Folders spread across the workbench. Bank statements, property documents. My name printed where I hadn't signed. Voices drifted from behind the freezer. Low, urgent. "He doesn't need to know yet," my wife said. Something in my chest tightened. Not anger, recognition. I didn't step closer. I didn't announce myself. I stood there long enough to understand that whatever was happening had been planned without me. Then I turned around and went back inside. Sleep didn't come easily after that. In the dark, I replayed old moments with new weight. Every time I'd swallowed a comment. Every time I'd paid without asking why. Every time I'd been praised for being easy. Morning arrived like it always did. Coffee, emails, my badge clipped on. At breakfast, my wife talked about errands. Her tone stayed light, casual. "We'll need some extra cash this month," she said, not looking up. I nodded, picked up my keys. The routine held, but something underneath had shifted. Walking out the door, I realized the quiet I'd been protecting wasn't peace, it was erasure. I stepped onto the driveway, pulled the door shut behind me, and stood there longer than usual before heading to work. My hands still wrapped around the keys, feeling the weight of them press into my palm as the garage door hummed faintly back to life. The tension didn't stay in the garage. It traveled, quiet but efficient, slipping into phone calls and casual conversations I wasn't part of. By midweek, I started getting messages that didn't ask questions, only checked boxes. "Your mother-in-law said you're stressed lately. Everything okay? We know you've got a lot on your plate. Family can be demanding." No one mentioned the documents. No one brought up the late-night meetings. Responsibility drifted toward me the way it always had, as if silence counted as consent. At work, things stayed predictable. A cracked pipe in one building, a a delayed inspection in another, problems with solutions. I handled them, signed off, moved on. During lunch, a coworker joked about how lucky I was to have a big family that sticks together. I smiled because that's what people do when correcting someone would take too long. At home, the air felt crowded without anyone saying much. My wife moved around the kitchen with purpose, rearranging drawers that didn't need rearranging. Her phone buzzed more often than usual. When I asked about dinner plans, she answered without looking up. "We'll see." Her parents dropped by unannounced that Friday. They always had, but this time the visit came with a script. Her father talked about expenses rising everywhere. Her mother sighed about how hard it was to keep things afloat these days. "You've always been the strong one," her mother said, placing a hand on my arm. "We're grateful." Gratitude used as leverage doesn't sound like gratitude at all. I nodded, poured drinks, let the conversation drift. Later that night, I sat in the living room, scrolling through emails I'd already read. The house hummed around me. In my head, two voices took turns. One insisted this would pass if I stayed steady. The other counted every time staying steady had cost me something. Saturday morning, I drove into DC earlier than usual, parked near a small cafe a few blocks from my office. The place smelled like burnt espresso and impatience. C2 was already there, stirring his cup even though the sugar had long dissolved. "You look tired," he said, not bothering with small talk. I shrugged and ordered coffee, sat down across from him. "Family stuff." He waited, always had that habit. Silence without pressure. I told him enough to be accurate, not enough to feel exposed. The documents, the garage, the way decisions kept moving without my input. C2 leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. "You know what that is, right?" "I know what it feels like." "Feels like you're being managed in your own life." The words landed harder than I expected. "They probably don't see it that way," I said. "That's the point," he replied. "They don't have to." He reminded me of something I'd once told a junior supervisor who kept covering for his team. Being dependable doesn't mean being invisible. I stared into my cup. Outside, people crossed the street, headed somewhere specific. "So what do I do?" I asked. "First, stop assuming silence keeps things calm. Sometimes it just tells people you'll carry whatever they put down." We talked about boundaries without using the word too often, about how systems don't break all at once. They shift, slowly, until one day you don't recognize your role anymore. When we stood to leave, C2 added one more thing. "You don't sound angry. That worries me more than if you were." Driving home, his words followed me. At a red light, my phone buzzed again. A group message from her family popped up, already mid-conversation. Decisions finalized, numbers agreed on. No one had asked. I didn't respond. Not yet. That evening, I walked past the garage without opening the door. My wife mentioned a meeting she had later in the week, said it casually, like weather. "It'll be quick," she added. I nodded, set my keys down, and listened to the sound of drawers opening and closing in the next room, staying where I was, letting the moment stretch just long enough to feel how alone the quiet had become. The first doubt didn't come from my wife or her parents. It came from a stranger who had no reason to lie. I was at a hardware store after work, picking up filters I didn't need right away, just to give myself something normal to do. At the counter, the clerk scanned my items, paused, then looked at the screen again. "You're the owner on record for that rental off Route 1, right?" I told him he must be mistaken. We didn't own anything off Route 1. He frowned, tapped the keyboard. "That's odd. It's listed under your name, same address as your license." I didn't argue. I paid and walked out with the bag, cutting into my fingers harder than it should have. In the car, I sat there longer than necessary before starting the engine, letting the words replay. Owner on record, listed under your name. At home, I asked about it lightly, too lightly. "Did we ever look at property around Route 1? My wife didn't hesitate. "No, why would we?" Her answer came fast, practiced. The conversation shifted before I could ask another question. Dinner plans, weather, a story about her cousin's kids. That night, I opened the filing cabinet in my home office instead of the garage. Old tax returns, insurance papers, boring things that had always been where I left them. Nothing about Route 1. The next few days brought more small disturbances. a bank alert about a balance change I didn't recognize, a voicemail from an accountant I'd never hired, asking to confirm an appointment. Each time I brought it up, I was met with the same response. You're overthinking. It's probably a mix-up. Why are you stressing yourself out? Information started to move around me instead of through me. Emails went unanswered. Meetings happened without my knowledge. Decisions were presented as done deals. Her parents became more present, not loud, just constant. Suggestions turned into instructions. We'll handle that for you. You don't need to worry about this part. It's easier if one person takes charge. One person never meant me. Doubt crept in quietly. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe exhaustion was filling in gaps that weren't really there. That thought unsettled me more than the alternative. I stopped asking direct questions and started listening differently. Not for answers, but for patterns. Dates, names, numbers repeated a little too often. One evening, while my wife showered, her phone lit up on the counter. I didn't pick it up. Didn't need to. The preview said enough. Make sure he doesn't see the documents yet. Later, alone in the garage, I didn't touch anything. I stood where I could see the filing cabinet, the boxes, the space behind the freezer. Instead of opening drawers, I took pictures with my phone. Folder labels, account names, dates written in handwriting that wasn't mine. At work, I stayed late and printed copies of my credit report. The Route 1 property showed up right there. Clean, official, real. Someone had made decisions using my name as leverage. I bought a small lockbox the next day. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to store copies where I could control access. At night, while the house settled into its usual rhythm, I scanned documents and saved them to a drive I kept in my jacket pocket. Conversation at home grew thinner. My wife watched me more closely. Her questions shifted. Why are you working so late? Who were you on the phone with? I answered truthfully without offering detail. The same courtesy I'd been given. The sense of order I'd lived inside for years didn't collapse. It rearranged itself without permission. Familiar routines started carrying an edge. Ordinary moments required attention. One morning, heading out, I noticed the garage door already open. Voices drifted out, low and deliberate. I slowed my step, stayed just out of sight, and listened long enough to recognize that whatever was being built no longer included me as anything more than a signature. I turned away, closed the front door behind me, and drove to work with copies of my own life tucked into my coat, already thinking through what else I needed to gather before anyone realized I'd stopped standing still. The invitation came through email, copied to more people than necessary. A meeting about shared obligations, scheduled for a weekday afternoon, held at a small office near Baltimore Harbor. My name sat at the top of the agenda, like a stamp of approval I hadn't given. I arrived early out of habit, not to make a point, just because I always had. My wife walked in 10 minutes later with her parents. She didn't sit next to me. That detail landed before anything else did. The accountant followed, then a real estate agent I recognized from the paperwork. No introductions were needed. Everyone acted like we'd all been aligned for months. The agent started talking numbers, rental income, maintenance costs, a refinancing plan already underway. When my name came up, it was as a formality. As you've agreed, he said, sliding a document across the table. I didn't touch it. I haven't agreed to anything, I said, keeping my voice level. The room stalled for a half second, long enough for my wife to step in. We discussed this. You said you trusted us to handle it. Her mother nodded quickly. You didn't want to be burdened with the details. Eyes shifted toward me, not hostile, curious, the kind that quietly asks why I'm complicating things. That's not accurate, I said. No one argued. They just moved on, continuing as if the correction had been noted and dismissed. The damage came later. By the end of the meeting, responsibilities had been reassigned without my consent. Decisions were, temporarily, delegated. I was thanked for my flexibility. Walking back to the car, I felt something loosen behind my ribs. Not panic, something colder. At work the next day, my supervisor asked if everything was okay at home. The question wasn't casual. Someone called the office, he said, raised concerns about your availability. I didn't need to ask who. I assured him my workload hadn't slipped. It hadn't. Still, the seed had been planted. Trust doesn't evaporate all at once. It thins. By Friday, a committee I usually chaired moved forward without my input. Nothing dramatic, just a calendar change, a quiet exclusion. At home, the shift continued. Mail stopped coming directly to me. When I asked about a notice from the bank, my wife answered too quickly. It's handled. Handled meant decided. That weekend, a neighbor asked if we were expanding our rental properties. He'd heard about the place off Route 1, congratulated me like I'd done something smart. I stood there, nodding, while the story of my own life circulated without me in it. Sunday evening, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. Not to confront anyone, to check facts, property records, account access, legal thresholds, the things no one mentioned out loud. My name still carried weight, just not control. Later, voices drifted from the living room. My wife speaking softly, her parents responding in measured tones. "He'll calm down," her mother said. "He always does." The sentence settled into me slowly. I walked in, picked up my jacket, and told them I was heading out to clear my head. No one tried to stop me. At a gas station off the highway, I sat in the car longer than necessary, hands resting on the wheel. I thought about all the times being calm had been mistaken for being compliant, about how often restraint had been read as permission. The loss wasn't just financial or professional, it was positional. I'd been moved without being removed, sidelined while still expected to carry weight. Back home, I passed the garage again. The door stood closed, locked. I didn't force it open. Instead, I went upstairs, pulled the lockbox from the closet, and added the notes from the meeting. Names, dates, decisions made in my absence. From the hallway, I heard my wife moving around downstairs, cabinets opening and shutting. Normal sounds, ordinary. I placed the box back where it belonged, slid the key into my pocket, and headed down the stairs, already running through what it would take to stop reacting and start choosing what happened next. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring once before answering. "You don't know me," the woman said, her voice steady, almost careful. "But I think you should check the title history on the Route 1 property again. Not the summary, the amendments." She hung up before I could ask anything. That night, sleep stayed out of reach. I lay there listening to the house settle, letting the ceiling fan do its slow work, while an older memory surfaced without warning. Years ago, after my first marriage collapsed, a lawyer had told me something I hadn't wanted to hear. If you don't define your boundaries, someone else will, and they won't ask first. Back then, I'd nodded and gone back to doing what felt familiar, carrying weight, making things easier for everyone else. The next morning, I drove into DC before traffic thickened and met C2 at his office. No small talk this time. I laid out what I had. Documents, dates, the meeting near the harbor, the phone call. He read through everything without interrupting, then leaned back in his chair. "This isn't confusion," he said. "It's design." The words settled in slowly. "They're counting on you staying reasonable," he continued. "On you not wanting to blow things up. That's the leverage. If I push back, I lose what little ground I have left. If you don't, you lose all of it." He didn't soften the truth. I appreciated that more than comfort. On the way home, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a group email, extended family. A long message about concern, about tension, about how hard things had become for my wife under pressure. My name appeared only once, near the end. "Let's all give him space until he's ready to talk." Space, apparently, meant decisions moving forward without me. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the garage was full. Cars I didn't recognize. Voices layered over one another. A family meeting I hadn't been invited to. I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the car and watched my reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back didn't seem angry, just tired of negotiating his own presence. Inside, the conversation stopped when I walked in. My wife's sister cleared her throat. "We were just talking through some options. About things that affect me," I said. No one answered directly. Her father stepped in instead. "You've been distant lately. We're trying to help." Help had a way of sounding like authority when repeated often enough. Later that evening, a mutual friend called to check on me, asked if everything was okay between me and my wife, mentioned she'd heard I was being uncooperative. The word made me laugh, short and humorless. That was the moment the choice stopped being theoretical. I went upstairs, closed the door to my office, and pulled out the lockbox, laid everything on the desk, The property records, the bank notices, the screenshots. Patterns formed when I stopped pretending they didn't. Downstairs, laughter drifted up the stairs. Familiar, comfortable, built on the assumption that I'd keep absorbing whatever landed on me. I opened a new document on my laptop and started listing what needed to happen next. Not in broad strokes, specific steps, who to contact, what to freeze, what to clarify legally. The phone buzzed again. A text from my wife. "Why are you making this harder than it needs to be?" I didn't answer, not because I didn't care, because I finally understood that responding meant agreeing to the framing. Instead, I saved the document, shut the laptop, and stood up. In the hallway, voices rose and fell in familiar rhythms, life continuing as if nothing had shifted. I grabbed my jacket, slipped the lockbox back into the closet, and headed toward the stairs, already moving through the house differently, aware that whatever came next would change more than just paperwork. I started waking up earlier, not because of anxiety, but because my head felt clear for the first time in weeks. There's a difference between being restless and being ready. This was the second one. Each morning followed a simple pattern. Coffee, notebook, laptop. I reviewed documents the way I used to review maintenance logs at work, line by line, looking for inconsistencies, not drama. Dates mattered. Signatures mattered. What wasn't said mattered more. Instead of reacting, I organized. Bank statements went into one folder, property records into another, screenshots labeled with time and source. I stopped guessing and started confirming. County databases, public filings, a short call to a clerk who answered questions without curiosity. Yes, that amendment would require consent from all listed parties. I thanked her and hung up. At work, I stayed efficient. No changes in performance, no visible strain. That mattered. Credibility doesn't come from speeches. It comes from consistency when pressure rises. Evenings at home felt different, not tense, observed. My wife watched me more closely now. Questions came wrapped in concern. "You've been quiet lately. You seem distant." I answered politely, briefly. Nothing to correct, nothing to expand. Her parents stopped dropping by without notice. Instead, messages came through my wife, filtered. They just want to make sure you're okay. Being okay had become a narrative they controlled. I let them keep it, for now. One afternoon, an unfamiliar car slowed near the house as I pulled into the driveway. It didn't stop. Didn't need to. The signal was enough. Later that night, my wife asked casually where I'd been after work. "Around," I said. She nodded, but the question lingered in the air longer than it should have. I met C2 again, this time walking along the harbor. No files exchanged, just conversation. "They'll escalate when they realize you're not folding," he said. "I'm counting on it. Make sure you're ready for the part where they paint you as the problem." I already felt that shift happening. Mutual friends calling less often, invitations drying up, neutral parties choosing distance over clarity. Isolation isn't always loud. Sometimes it just rearranges your phone contacts. At night, I backed everything up twice. One drive stayed with me. Another went somewhere no one else accessed. I changed passwords methodically, not in a rush. One system at a time. A small thing happened on Thursday. I came home to find the lock on the garage replaced. New hardware, clean install. "Thought it was time," my wife said when I asked. "For what?" "Privacy." I nodded, let it stand. Later, alone in my office, I added that detail to my notes. Not because I needed it to prove anything, but because patterns rely on accumulation. Sleep came easier than expected. Dreams stayed quiet. The next day, a letter arrived addressed to my wife, but left open on the counter. Legal letterhead, a consultation confirmation. My name wasn't on it. I didn't mention it. I didn't take it. Instead, I reviewed my checklist and crossed off another item. By the weekend, conversations around me sounded rehearsed. Compliments felt staged. Concern carried timing. "We're just worried about you," her sister said over the phone. "I'm handling things," I replied. "You don't have to do everything alone." That line almost made me smile. Sunday afternoon, while the house filled with ordinary noise, I stepped outside and made one more call. Short, direct, set an appointment. When I came back in, my wife glanced up from the couch. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said. She studied my face, searching for something familiar, then looked away. I headed upstairs, placed my notebook in the drawer, and set my alarm for the morning, aware that the calm wasn't peace. It was the space you get right before someone realizes the ground they've been standing on is about to give way. The notice came by certified mail and sat on the kitchen counter like it belonged there. I didn't open it right away. I washed my hands, dried them, checked the time, then slit the envelope cleanly. It wasn't a lawsuit yet, just intent, a claim tied to the Route 1 property, questioning my prior consent and outlining potential liability if matters weren't resolved quickly. Legal language has a way of sounding calm while narrowing your options. Upstairs, my wife was on the phone. Her voice carried through the hallway, tight in a way I hadn't heard before. "No, not yet. He doesn't know everything." I folded the letter and set it aside. At work, the pressure found me before I reached my desk. HR asked for a brief meeting. Nothing formal, they said, just clarification. A concern had been raised about outside business interests conflicting with my role. "It's probably nothing," the rep added, "but we have to document it. Documenting doubt is how institutions protect themselves." I understood that. Still, walking back to my office, I felt the ground shift another inch. By afternoon, my phone filled with missed calls. Family, mutual friends, even someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "We're hearing things," one message said. "Thought you should know." What they were hearing wasn't entirely false. It was incomplete, shaped just enough to suggest recklessness where there had been restraint. That night, her parents showed up without calling. No small talk this time. "We need to address this head on," her father said, standing in the living room like he owned the place. "Address what?" I asked. "Your resistance. It's putting everyone at risk." The sentence landed hard because it inverted reality so cleanly. "You signed documents without my consent," I said. "That's the risk." Her mother's eyes filled quickly. The performance was familiar. "After everything we've been through," she said, voice shaking, "this is how you repay us." My wife stood between us, arms crossed. "You're making this worse than it needs to be," she said. "If you just cooperate, this could go away." Cooperate. The word had followed me for weeks. I felt the old instinct rise. Smooth things over. Take the hit. Keep the structure standing, even if it leaned on me alone. Instead, I excused myself and went upstairs. In the office, I shut the door and sat down. The room felt smaller than usual. Or maybe the margin for error had. I pulled out the lockbox and laid everything across the desk again. The legal notice, my notes, the amended filings. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what losing could look like. Job, reputation, access to my own accounts, the weight pressed in from every side. A memory surfaced without invitation. My first divorce, years ago. Sitting in a rented apartment, realizing I'd confused endurance with loyalty. Promising myself I wouldn't repeat that mistake. Downstairs, voices rose. My name came up more than once. "He's always been like this," someone said. "Quiet until he snaps." I didn't snap. I breathed. I picked up the phone and called C2. Late, but he answered. "I think they're pushing for a settlement that pins liability on you," he said after I explained. "It's aggressive. What happens if I keep trying to stay calm?" Then they keep advancing. They're already counting your silence as agreement. I hung up and sat there longer than planned, hands flat on the desk, feeling the old fear tug at me. Not fear of them, fear of disruption, of being the one who breaks the pattern. Downstairs, the front door opened and closed. The house quieted. I gathered the papers and slid them back into the box. Not because I was done, but because I needed them intact. Before leaving the room, I added one more note to the list, a line I'd avoided writing until now. File. I turned off the light, stepped into the hallway, and went down the stairs where my wife stood alone, scrolling on her phone, already sensing something had shifted, but not yet knowing how far. The email arrived just after lunch, buried between vendor updates and meeting reminders. The subject line didn't stand out. The sender did. It was the accountant whose voicemail I'd ignored weeks earlier. This time, the message was careful. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about who authorized the last amendment. I'm attaching what I have." I didn't open the attachment right away. Experience had taught me that hope needs verification, not enthusiasm. When I finally clicked through, the timeline shifted. The document showed a signature block left blank. An internal note followed, time-stamped, explaining that authorization had been assumed based on verbal confirmation from a third party. Not me. Never me. I read it twice, then again, slower. The implication was simple. Consent hadn't been given. It had been claimed. At home, the afternoon unfolded like any other. My wife moved through the house, phone pressed to her ear, voice lowered when she passed me. When she hung up, she said nothing. Neither did I. Later, I met C2 at a small diner just outside the city. Booth by the window. No laptops this time. I slid my phone across the table instead. He scrolled, paused, then looked up. That changes the leverage. Enough? Enough to stop them from pretending this was mutual. The relief didn't arrive all at once. It crept in carefully, like something that didn't want to be noticed too soon. They'll deny it, he added. Say it was implied, miscommunication. That's fine. You sound calm. I'm done trying to sound like anything. Back home, the atmosphere tightened without anyone naming it. Her parents stopped calling altogether. Mutual friends stayed quiet. Silence, this time, worked in my favor. I started mapping everything out, not just the property, but the pattern. Who spoke for whom? Who benefited? Who rushed decisions forward when questions surfaced? One name kept appearing, a distant cousin of my wife's, listed as an intermediary on several documents, always present, never accountable. I pulled public records, cross-referenced dates, confirmed addresses. The picture sharpened. That evening, my wife confronted me in the kitchen. You've been talking to people behind my back. I've been talking to people about things that involve my name. You're acting like this is some kind of scheme. I'm treating it like something that needs clarity. She shook her head, frustration breaking through the composure. You're going to ruin everything over paperwork. Paperwork had a way of deciding whose life got rearranged. She knew that. So did I. We can still fix this, she said, softer now. Just let it go. I watched her closely. For the first time in years, I didn't feel pulled by the plea. It's already fixed, I said. Just not the way you want. She stared at me, searching for the version of me that used to fold. It didn't surface. That night, I organized the last set of files and sent a single email. No accusations, no emotion, just facts attached, with a request for formal clarification. The response came faster than expected. Defensive, over-explained, careless. I printed it and placed it on top of the others. Sleep came in short stretches, not restless, alert. In the morning, I packed a folder instead of a lunch. When my wife asked where I was going, I gave her the truth. To finish something. She didn't follow me to the door. Outside, the air felt ordinary. Cars passed, neighbors waved. Life went on, unaware of the adjustments about to be made. I slid into the driver's seat, set the folder on the passenger side, and started the engine, already rehearsing the order of facts in my head. Not to persuade anyone, but to make sure there would be no room left for interpretation when the next conversation began. The room wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. A long table, neutral walls, a few chairs already occupied. My wife sat near the far end, her parents beside her. The attorney across from them arranged his papers with the confidence of someone who expected cooperation. I took my seat without greeting anyone. The folder stayed closed in front of me. The mediator began with formalities, outlining the purpose of the meeting. Shared assets, clarification of authority, risk exposure. Clean language designed to keep voices level. The attorney spoke next, calm, precise. He framed the situation as a misunderstanding, fueled by my reluctance to engage. My client acted in good faith, he said, based on long-standing patterns of consent. That phrase surfaced again, long-standing patterns. My wife nodded slightly, eyes fixed on the table. Her mother dabbed at the corner of her eye, already playing her part. He's always trusted us, she said softly. Until now. I waited. Let the rhythm settle. Let them spend their certainty. When it was my turn, I didn't argue. I opened the folder and slid the first document forward. This is the amendment filed last spring, I said. Notice the signature block. The mediator leaned in. The attorney paused. Blank, I continued. No signature, no authorization. The attorney adjusted his glasses. Verbal consent was given, he said. We have statements to that effect. I slid the second page across. Internal correspondence from your accountant, time-stamped. It states consent was assumed, not confirmed. The room shifted. Small movements, a chair leg scraping. My wife looked up. "That's not what happened," she said. I met her eyes for the first time that day. "Then show where I agreed." Silence held for a beat too long. The attorney recovered quickly. Even if there was an oversight, the intent was clear. Intent doesn't override law. I placed the next document down. Property records, highlighted entries, names that weren't mine. These decisions benefited specific parties, I said. Intermediaries with no legal authority. That matters. Her father leaned forward. "You're turning this into something it doesn't have to be." "I didn't bring it here. I'm just naming it." The final attempt came fast, emotional, predictable. "After everything we've done for you," my wife said, voice tight, "this is how you repay us?" The words hit an old place, a familiar pressure behind the sternum. The part of me trained to absorb blame to keep structures intact. I breathed through it. "This isn't repayment," I said. "It's correction." The mediator cleared his throat. "Based on what's been presented," he said slowly, "there appears to be a significant procedural issue." The attorney closed his folder. "We'll need to reassess." The room emptied in stages. Her parents left first, stiff and quiet. The attorney followed, already on his phone. My wife stayed seated, staring at the table as if it might explain something. "You didn't have to do this here," she said. "I did. You could have talked to me." "I tried. You decided for me instead." She didn't respond. Outside, the air felt no different than any other weekday afternoon. People passed by, carrying their own problems, unaware that a structure had just collapsed quietly inside a rented room. I didn't wait for anyone. I walked to my car, placed the empty folder on the seat, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. My hands were steady. At a stoplight, my phone buzzed. A message from HR confirming the matter at work had been resolved pending documentation. Another from the accountant, apologetic, brief. I drove home without rushing, already shifting attention to what still needed doing, knowing the loudest part of this was over, and the consequences would unfold without me needing to oversee them. The house felt different once the paperwork started moving without my involvement. Not emptier, just quieter in a way that didn't ask anything from me. I stayed for a few weeks after the meeting, long enough to finish what needed finishing. Accounts were separated, access changed, titles corrected. The work moved forward through email confirmations and brief calls, all business, no emotion. That was how I wanted it. Distance doesn't always come from leaving. Sometimes it comes from clarity. My wife avoided direct conversation. When we crossed paths, she spoke about logistics, who would take which boxes, how the schedule would shift. There were no apologies. None were offered on my side either. Apologies only make sense when both people agree on what went wrong. Her parents stopped calling altogether. Later, I heard through someone else that the Route 1 situation had unraveled fast once scrutiny arrived. The intermediary cousin stepped back. The accountant withdrew cooperation. A few favors that had once felt permanent disappeared overnight. Consequences don't announce themselves. They just show up and stay. At work, things steadied. The concern raised earlier closed quietly after documentation cleared. A supervisor nodded in the hallway one morning and said nothing more. Trust wasn't rebuilt. It was simply confirmed. Evenings became simpler. I cooked for myself, sorted through drawers one at a time, decided what stayed and what didn't. Each choice felt small until it added up to something solid. One night, I came across an old photo tucked behind a filing folder. My kids, years ago, laughing at something I couldn't remember now. I stood there longer than expected, not missing what was gone, just acknowledging the weight I'd carried trying to keep everything intact. That was the weakness I finally named. Not anger, not fear. The belief that my value came from holding things together at any cost. Once that broke, the rest followed naturally. The last thing I handled was the garage. I unlocked the door, cleared out what didn't belong to me, and left the space clean. No ceremony, just work done properly. On the final morning, I loaded the car before anyone else was awake. The house didn't resist. It didn't need to. My wife stood in the doorway when I grabbed the last box. "So that's it?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded once, like someone acknowledging a result they hadn't expected, but couldn't argue with anymore. Driving away, there was no rush of relief, no victory, just a steady sense of alignment. Like a joint set back into place after being off for too long. I moved into a smaller place not far from work, neutral, functional, mine. The first night there, I slept through without waking once. Days filled themselves again. Work, calls with my kids, a walk in the evenings when the weather held. No one asking me to absorb more than I chose to give. Occasionally, news filtered in, legal follow-ups, financial corrections, family tensions I was no longer part of. I didn't track the details. Knowing they existed was enough. One afternoon, I sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee and watched traffic move below. Ordinary sounds, ordinary motion, nothing waiting for me to fix it. That was the quiet I'd been missing, not the kind built on endurance, the kind that comes after you stop negotiating your place in your own life. I finished the coffee, set the cup down, and went inside to answer an email, already focused on what came next, without needing to explain myself to anyone.